Hello guys, today the PowerPoint that I'm giving to you all will cover fragments, run-ons, and comma splices. And one of the reasons why I'm covering this topic is because I've seen quite a few of these errors in your writing. Some of them are fragments, missing either that subject or the predicate. Some of you are adding commas in places where you should have a period or a semicolon, or just turn it into two separate sentences. Which causes those comma splices or those comma fused sentences. So today the PowerPoint is going to cover some of those common mistakes and hopefully try to show you some of the best ways to fix those errors. All right, so the first thing that you need to know is what is a sentence. And that sounds a little bit of an elementary question, but in order to understand run-ons and fragments, you must have a very strong concept of what a sentence is. Recall that a sentence is a complete thought. It is a complete thought. That means that it consists of a subject and a predicate. If you do not have both of these parts, then you do not have a sentence. All right, so first let's look at what is a fragment. We know that a sentence contains a subject and a predicate. It's a complete thought. So when we think about a fragment, think about it in essence to missing something. So when you have a fragment, that means that you're either missing the subject or you're missing the predicate. All right, so some key words to look for in reference to fragments. Whenever you use the words whenever, because, since, until, although, and even if. When you use these words, make sure that you have the other portion of your sentence. Typically, these are going to be found in the subject portion of the sentence. So if you have this alone, you've created a fragment because you're missing the predicate portion of the sentence. All right, some other things to look for when dealing with fragments are both prepositional phrases and participial phrases. Prepositional phrases and participial phrases usually are in the subject of the sentence, but they cannot be alone. So when you're using these, make sure that you are also adding the predicate portion of that to complete the sentence. All right, so often when we have fragments in our writing, the two pieces can fit together. You might have a fragment and then you might have another fragment, but what you can do is pull or attach those fragments into a nearby sentence, or pull those two fragments together to make a complete sentence. You've been given some examples of those. If you look at that very first one, it says, "On that morning I sat in my usual spot." And then they've added something to that. They said, "On the old wooden chair in the corner of my grandmother's kitchen." All right, so both of those are fragments as they are, but as you look at those, you can see that they are related, so they can be pulled together to make one complete sentence. And so then you have the following sentence that reads, "On that morning I sat in my usual spot, comma, on the old wooden chair in the corner of my grandmother's kitchen." So they've taken those two fragments because they were similar in thought, and they've combined those into one grammatically correct sentence. All right, so what is a run-on? This is one of the common errors that I have been seeing in the learning journals as I've been grading them. So it tells you that a run-on is when you fuse two sentences into one without any conjunction and punctuation mark. So look at the examples. Their gestures are a means of communication for everyone. They are essential for the hearing impaired. As you can look at that, you see that those are two separate sentences, and they've identified those by color coding those. The red one is one sentence and the blue one is one sentence as well. All right, connecting two or more independent sentences by a comma without a coordinating conjunction is called a comma splice. So think about those coordinating conjunctions, sometimes they're referred to as the fanboys, and that's just an acronym to help you remember those and, but, or, nor, for, so, and yet. And so they've given you an example of what that looks like. Gestures are a means of communication for everyone. And then they put the comma there. They are essential for the hearing impaired. So that sentence is a run-on or a comma splice. So you would need to add one of those conjunctions there to make it an appropriate sentence. All right, and so this is just an FYI to just remind you that it does take some time and practice to be able to correctly write your sentences and correcting those comma splices, those run-ons, those fragments. And these are just some common things that you might see. And if you look closely at those, you should be able to find the comma splices in these different signs or different things that you might see in the actual world. So look closely at those and see if you can identify those comma splices. All right, so there are 4 ways that you can fix a run-on sentence, and the very first one is by adding a comma and a coordinating conjunction, and they listed those for you as well as giving you an example of what that looks like. So the second way to fix a run-on sentence is by using a semicolon and a transitional expression, and they've also given you an example of that as well. When you use the semicolon and that transitional expression, make sure you use a comma after the transitional expression. And the example of that is however. All right, so the third way to fix a run-on sentence is simply make the clause into 2 separate sentences. That means that you're going to add an end punctuation, and then you're going to capitalize for that first letter for that next sentence. So you would take those and separate them into 2 separate sentences. The final way to fix a run-on sentence is simply by restructuring the sentence, and that can be an independent clause and a dependent clause. So basically an independent clause can stand alone. It doesn't need anything else to be complete. But then a dependent clause depends on that independent clause to make grammatical sense or to make logical sense to you as you read it. They've given you an example of that. Although gestures are a means of communication for everyone, that would be a dependent clause. It cannot stand alone. They are essential for hearing impaired, and that one would be an independent clause. But together, when you fuse those 2 together, it makes perfect logical and grammatical sense.